Welcome back, everyone. We are officially halfway. This is week 3. Before we get started with this week's lecture, though, please make sure you've submitted your first assignment if you have not done so. And this week, there will be a course for you to complete, so please make sure you get that done. You may also submit any comments or questions regarding the course thus far that you may have for me at any time. Thank you. Let's get straight into it. So, our first question this week is, what is clothing? Clothing is defined as items that are worn on the body. Typically, clothing is made of fabrics or textiles, but over time it has included garments made from animal skin and other thin sheets of materials and natural products found in the environment put together. Now, I bet you didn't know there was a difference between clothing and fashion, but there is. So, what is fashion? Fashion is defined as a form of self-expression and autonomy at a particular period and place in a specific context of clothing, footwear, style, lifestyle, accessories, makeup, hairstyle, and body posture. The term implies a look that is defined by the fashion industry as that which is trending. There are two common types of fashion. These are known as sustainable fashion and fast fashion. These are the common types of fashion that we hear a lot more than the others. With regards to the two types of fashion, fast fashion is defined as cheap clothing produced quickly and sold by large mass market retailers in order to respond to the latest fashion trends. An example of a shop for this would be your H&M, and in South Africa we have Mr. Price. They make bulk clothing that stick to the fashion trends and quick as possible to sell to the consumer. Sustainable fashion is defined as the design, production, and consumption of clothing in a manner that respects the planet and the people who make our clothes. Now, the number one question we need to ask ourselves when it comes to fashion is, how does fashion relate to us and our space? Sociological studies of fashion culture analyze the studies of fashion to two main sociological themes, which are social control and social change. Social control focuses mainly on the forms of patterns of pressure in which results in the social order being maintained through cohesion. This is typically applied by employed or privileged group members as a response to those that are defined or seen as problematic or threatening, with the goal of achieving these problematic individuals to conform. In other words, to simplify this, what this means is that social control is done by those who are in charge, and they, to be used very loosely, bully the inferior individuals and get them to go and support their side. That is how social control can be defined in simpler terms. Social change is thus the impact that the human relations and relationships affect and transform cultural institutions over time. Of course, we know by now that human interactions and relationships and how these occur and in the spaces that these occur obviously have an effect on how things will be done in the future. And now we look at our main theme, fashion as a part of material culture. Through the analysis of fashion as material culture, we are able to base an analysis of a process that results in creation and attribution of symbolic value. Various perceptions can result from the analysis of clothing as a part of material culture, such as fashion being perceived as a type of text that expresses symbols and contributes to discourses around culture. Fashion being analyzed as a communication of symbolic values associated with material culture, and the process whereby meanings could be dismantled, as well as analysis of the attribution of symbolic values to material culture by consumers and of their responses to symbolic values attributed to material culture by producers of material culture. Through my own research, I was able to analyze clothing being used as a means of interclass communication. By this, I mean that through my studying of the two groups, being the rural youth as well as the suburban youth, I was able to see that they found a commonality through the use of fashion and through trends. They found that they can relate to each other through various brands that they wear and through various clothings, and therefore can tell their stories through this. I was also able to identify clothing as a text, a social artifact, a symbol, as well as a narrative. If you look at the image below, this shows the various aspects that can define fashion for any individual. This includes inclusivity, identity, authenticity, creativity, freedom, and expression. Obviously, the percentages will vary from individual to individual, but we will be addressing most, if not all, of these themes over the next few weeks as we take a deeper look into my research and specify our material culture studies. Fashion and expression. There's obviously a relationship between fashion and expression. So, through my research and analysis of Tebe Magugu, a local South African designer, for example's work, and his use of the academic discipline of anthropology, I was able to identify and to show how fashion and anthropology come together by using clothing as a social artifact through usage of objects associated with his childhood in his township, Galesho. Therefore, through the use of various patterns or feelings associated with those objects that he uses as an inspiration for the creation of his garments. Now, Teva Makugu is a local South African designer who has recently just blew up internationally and at the moment I think has a show going on for the Spring Summer 2022 fashion show in Paris. His work, when I discovered it through his collection called Anthropology, where he had, as I stated in the slide, used various patterns or feelings that he associated with various objects that he had seen in his township and created an entire fashion line based off of this. Now, this relates to what we've been studying over the past few weeks, material culture. As we recall, material culture is basically rooted in our interactions with the objects and in our spaces and how we feel about these objects and what they represent for us. And so Tebe did this and he decided that he is going to express how these objects make him feel and make him remember through clothing. And that is how he then started his project Anthropology, which was one of his collections. Tebe narrates his life and uses clothing to reflect his township's notion of spirituality. His work shows that one of the uses of clothing being to frame our various narratives as individuals in relation to constructing and performing personal and social identities. Thus, the people who wear the clothing can express themselves and their relation to the various garments through the way they are put together and on whom. The image there in your below right-hand corner is an image from Anthro 1, a collection by Tebemagu, where he narrates his life through through his objects that he had occurred in his township. Now, through the side, you can see that Tebe states that through clothing, you can narrate yourself and you can also construct yourself as well as your personal and social identity. This is something that we will further discuss and that also shows up a lot in the research as one of the main themes. Fashion and identity. This is another major theme. The relationship between fashion and identity is one of the most visible and long-standing relationships. Fashion is a visible expression of various themes, with the main ones being both social and personal identity. When you think of your friendship groups or your old friendship groups in high school, perhaps, you remember that you didn't all dress the same. Maybe there were commonalities, with the trends, but even then you didn't put the clothing together the same. And this is because you were all trying to express a version of yourself. You're trying to express your personal identity. Now, this is due to the fact that the way that we dress can communicate to others how we portray ourselves in different social situations, underlined by social expectations and norms to how we express our sense of true self. This point just states that in various social situations, we may dress differently. Think of how you may dress to a meeting versus how you'll dress to a social event with your friends. There is a difference because with a meeting, there are certain expectations and norms that go with that specific situation, and there are requirements as to how you should dress to be perceived professionally. Whereas when you go to a social event with your friends, you can then express your true sense of self and you can wear what you want, how you want, thus narrating who you are and your personal identity rather than your social identity, which is who you would portray in a meeting. According to S. Nuttall, an individual's physical or socio-cultural location results in the self-conscious expression of who the individual is as well as what or who they identify with. This construction of identity can evolve and also allows for forms of selfhood to create a sense of belonging for those that have felt misunderstood. This is a concept called stylization. We will obviously go into this context in more detail next week, but what this basically means is that your location and where you live influences how you choose to express yourself through the clothing and who you choose to identify with. We live in different continents and we live in different societies with different norms and different regulations, and therefore we will not dress the same. There are certain things that are deemed okay, and there are certain things that are deemed not okay in my society, but may be different in your society, and therefore your physical location can determine how you present yourself, and this is usually a self-conscious expression of who you are. All right then. Well then, next week, the concept and the theme of stylization, as I mentioned before, is one of the main themes of the next week's lecture, and we will get into more detail of this as we get into more of the research and get more specific and detailed with our studies. I will attach a reading on stylization for you um, for this week, and as well as an excerpt from the research to ease you into the next week's topic so you have a bit of background and can know what to expect. Thank you so much for attending today's class. Please make sure to take the quiz and submit your assignments if you have not, and I will see you all next week.